Okay, so once we kind of casual conversation, you can look anywhere this side of the camera, just don't look at the camera.
Okay.
Please tell me your full name and spell it.
My full name is William Dana Hart. That is William. Middle name Dana, D-A-N-A. Last name Hart, H-A-R-T.
Do you have a professional title or anything you would like under your name?
No.
Okay. William, tell me a little bit about your family history as it relates to Columbia Harmony Cemetery.
So my connection with Columbian Harmony Cemetery is through my great-grandfather, Professor William Hart. And he is entered in that cemetery. And when I was growing up, we would visit that cemetery, and because I have other relatives that are also entered there. And we never even knew that, or I didn't know as a kid, that Professor Hart was buried there until I started learning more about him as I got into my teen years. And then as the years passed, I came to understand that he didn't have a headstone. And so I purchased one for him. And I always thought that, well, in that era, maybe Professor Hart couldn't afford a headstone. And that seemed kind of weird to me because he was an attorney, was a little while with the Department of Agriculture, Assistant Librarian of Congress, and so he was earning a living. And so it seemed a little strange that there would not be a headstone, but I accepted it. And I bought him one. And then I found out through Hassan, who contacted me about this effort to restore harmony. And that's kind of the story about how I am related to the Harmony Project through Professor Hart, my great-grandfather.
So your great-grandfather was originally at Columbian Harmony Cemetery, but you were visiting his plot at New Harmony.
Correct.
And at New Harmony, there was no
headstone.
headstone.
Correct.
What year did he pass away?
He passed away in 1934, January.
Okay. So if you could tell me a little bit about that, you know, as now that we both know, is he was originally entombed at Columbian Harmony Cemetery. When he was moved, you know, they had gotten rid of the original stones, and he didn't even have a stone. This you know, amazing attorney. Tell me a little bit about, you know, because I think that's a really interesting progression.
Yeah, well, so he didn't have a stone, and that really didn't come. That didn't become apparent to me until, you know, relatively recently, about 15 to 20 years ago, when I bought the stone. But however, regarding Professor Hart and what he means to the Washington, D.C. community in the area, his story is kind of interesting. Professor Hart is his father was a slaveholder and slave trader in Eufaula, Alabama, and named Clay Hart. And Clay Hart had 4 wives. His second wife was a woman of African descent. And so the year was 1856. So this was before the Civil War. And Professor Hart was born to Henry Clay's second wife, Henry Clay Hart, his second wife, in 1856 to an African-American mother. What I do not know is his mother, whose name is Jenny Dunn. I don't know if she was a free African-American person or was she enslaved. But still unusual for a union between a white slaveholder and a black person a marriage union at that time. And Professor Hart grew up in Eufaula and through the Civil War and into Reconstruction. And he became involved in politics. And during this time, Professor Hart was an advocate of the Reconstruction government that was being promoted at the time. And that didn't sit well with the folks in Eufaula, Alabama, and he was run out of town. So he walked all the way from Eufaula, Alabama to Washington, D.C., where he entered into Howard University preparatory school. They had a preparatory school at the time, and he matriculated through preparatory school in his undergraduate and his graduate. He's got a couple of law degrees, I believe a divinity degree, and several other degrees. And then he entered into civil rights work. And what I consider to be his, one of his most important achievements is a case that he set up to test the law of the land at the time, Jim Crow. And the case involved him buying a ticket from Boston to Washington, D.C. on the train. And he boarded the train in Boston. And when the train, he was with his sister, and when the train arrived at the Maryland state line, the conductor asked him to move to the Jim Crow car, and he refused. His sister, who was with him, she lost her nerve, and she went into the Jim Crow car. But he didn't, was arrested, fined $5, found guilty. He appealed that case to the Maryland Court of Appeals and won on a constitutional tenet, and that was that the federal government is the only entity in this nation that has domain over interstate commerce. And if you are on a train moving from state to state, you're engaging in interstate commerce. And therefore, the state doesn't have any power to tell you to move to the Jim Crow car. And so this was one of the first case, if not the first case, that began the dismantlement of the Jim Crow law and the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court ruling that law is based upon. So he is responsible for the desegregation of rail travel in Maryland. That is one of his achievements that I'm very proud of. Another one of his accomplishments that I was very proud of was the Hart Farm School for Boys. Professor Hart started the Hart Farm School for Boys in the late 1800s, 1898, and it existed till about 1904. And it was established on land that he bought from Senator Everett's, who was his mentor at the time. He was Senator Everett's private secretary. And so Senator Everett sold him about 250 acres of land right on the Potomac River and next to Fort Washington, where he established a school for boys and had about 50 boys living there, teaching them the principles of agriculture. He set up a government a democracy that would operate with a constitution for the school and a Bill of Rights, as well as a political system for voting for the boys to teach them governance as well as agriculture. And he had a contract with the district government for the district government to send their indigent youth to Professor Hart so that he could teach them and reform them. So the school operated for about 4 or 5 years, and then in a dispute with the DC government over the contract that I just described, that was the demise of the school. Professor Hart did sue the district government, and they wanted to settle with him for $144,000 in 1904. But being the principled person that he was, he turned it down. He felt he was owed at that time, he felt that he was owed damages in the millions. In 1904, Professor Hart thought that. And so he turned down a $144,000 settlement in the early 1900s. So a couple of stories about Professor Hart and how he got here from Alabama and what he did when he got here.
Amazing. And with the train situation, that was something it is believed he designed. He did it with the purpose of getting arrested and doing
Yes,
the case?
yes, absolutely. He did that. At that time, Professor Hart was a professor of criminal law at Howard University. And he was involved in the Washington, D.C. civil rights scene, I'll call it. And it was not unusual for black lawyers at that time of Jim Crow to construct tests, particularly those of our community like Professor Hart that worked and were educated in law. So yes, he designed the test specifically to challenge Plessy versus Ferguson because he knew that it was unconstitutional based on what the Constitution has to say about who owns interstate commerce in the USA.
Now, so he passed away in 1939.
1934.
I'm sorry, 1934, and was put to rest at the original Columbian Army Cemetery.
Yes.
And as we can assume, he had a stone when he was originally entombed, and then...
I have to assume. I've never seen a picture. I don't have any evidence of it. The only thing I have to go by until I purchased the stone was the plot.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, we know that Columbian Army Cemetery Society sold the land, and then the bodies were moved to New Harmony. The stones were not. The stones were thrown into the river.
That is what I understand. I understand that the contractor that was secured by the owners of Columbian Harmony, instead of, it was either the contractor or I think that that story is a little muddled, and we don't yet have all of the facts to say who did what and when. But in that transaction to move the cemetery from the original location to PG County, some work had to have been done to move the bodies, or planned to move the bodies and to move the headstones. Whatever was planned to move the headstones either wasn't executed, it may not have even been planned, there may not be even a contract to do the move. So that remains to be answered. Nevertheless, the headstones did not get moved. If the headstones should have been moved under contract, there may be a way to find that contract and get more information about what happened and how is it that these headstones did not get moved. So we don't have anybody to blame with certainty
Sure,
yet.
of course. But we have been recovering stones from the Potomac. If we were able by chance to find his stone, would that be of interest to you to see it, the original
Oh
stone?
my gosh, it would be of great interest. I don't even know how I would feel if I saw that. It would deliver to me an instant connection to my ancestor, who I have felt connected to just by reading about him. But to pull that stone out of the mud, out of the water of the Potomac River, it would be bliss for me to connect in that way with my ancestor. That would be a very personal joy. It brings a smile to my face even thinking about the possibility that that could happen.
And I think it's just so fascinating. When we were pulling these stones out, it's like every stone, it's not just, like finding a beautiful rock. It's like, this is a testament. This is someone's information. It's a name. It's a person. And the thought that there's so many more stones in there and we might be able to find them it just keeps me up at night.
Yes. And the fact that we don't know precisely who put the stones on the river and treated them as trash. It doesn't take anything away from the fact that they were hauled up the river by somebody and treated like trash. And today, it's really important. I answered your question about what it would mean to me to find the stone, and the first thing that came to my mind was the connection that it would bring to me, to my ancestor, that it would solidify even further that connection. However, that connection allows me to understand better and identify better with what he was trying to get done when he was alive. And we all have observed that same things that Professor Hart was trying to get done then are relevant to get done now. And so the connection is not just, if I found a stone, to solidify the connection, is not only to bring me happiness, but it is to help me use that connection to deliver what Professor Hart was trying to deliver to his community in those times, for me to deliver to our community today through educating my family and my friends and my community regarding you can do anything you want to do. And that connection has that additional meaning for me. I want to take it and I want to use it to deliver something good to the community.
Beautiful. Anything else you'd like to say about the project or your family tree in conclusion?
So the project, I am so excited about the project and Hassan, and I am very happy that they reached out to me. And in fact, since the interview that we did for CBS Sunday Morning, I have been contacted by Harts that are ancestors of mine, but happen to be related to one of Henry Clay Hart's third or fourth wife. Professor Hart was the second wife. The guy had 4 wives, and all of them bore children. Only one was an African-American woman, and the African-American woman was his second wife. And so I've been contacted by the third wife's and fourth wife's line of family. So they're my cousins. They're up in Rhode Island. And so they've invited me up to their beach summer home up there. So I'm going to go do that. And the whole thing, other than being personally rewarding, it allowed me to know some more of my family members. So it's been a great experience for me.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Awesome.
Great.
Awesome.
That was